Hello, good morning, and welcome to this maiden edition of our podcast, Educast, Asia, Africa. Today, we journey across classrooms, continents, and conversations that shape how the world learns. From Ghana to Namibia, Lesotho to China, and from South Africa through the Middle East and to China again, we share our stories of teaching geography and English linguistics, leadership, and a lifelong commitment to education without borders. In this episode, I, Henry, sitting in Koforia in the eastern region of Ghana, talk to Ambega, who is currently in China, Shenzhen, to explore what it truly means to teach, lead, and think critically in a globalized world. Thank you, Ambega, for joining me today. You have an extensive and global career in education. To begin, could you briefly introduce yourself and describe your journey into international education?
Thank you, Henry, for that introduction. I would like to share my journey with you, but before I do that, I would like to say that Henry and I have been friends for quite some time, and we've been always talking about starting a podcast and sharing our experiences with you. So, to those of you that are listening, please like, share, and subscribe if you're interested in our content, which is going to be about education, classrooms, AI, and leadership. To begin with myself, it's been a long, difficult journey. As we all know, life is never easy. So I started off my journey around 2015, 2016. That's my international career. But if I look at myself, how I got into education and academics, it started off by realizing between my late husband and myself that one of us has to be educated. So he decided it was me, and he drove me to a university called UNISA in South Africa, where I registered for my general Bachelor of Arts. I chose geography as my major because my geography teacher, Mr. Govender, left a very big impression on me. His mannerism, his empathy, his dress, his style, and the way he managed us in the classroom really impressed me, beside the subject on its own. So that's why geography is my major in my degree. I started teaching part-time and working. I further moved on when I realized that this is where I want to be. I moved on to study my PGCE. Again, I did my majors there was social science and English. I continued teaching. I became permanent, and then my country started offering tourism as a subject. So I saw an opportunity in tourism, and I did my ACE, which is an advanced certificate in education, and I specialized in tourism. The opportunity came to me to become a provincial examiner. That was a very good experience, which I will share part of it with you later on another episode. I went on further to start my MBA because I've always also had a passion for being an entrepreneur, and I've had during that time I had the tragedy of losing my husband. I completed my MBA, and at that point, I wanted to spend more time with my family, my children. So when I just completed my MBA, I wanted to lecture so my time could be well managed. But at that particular time, the South African government brought in the BEE Act, and they says they will not be employing Indians at universities. That was specifically in my province, where there's a stronghold of Indian population. And that's when I eventually decided to venture internationally. I was in Saudi Arabia for a short time. I learned a lot in that culture and context. And then I moved on to China. I think just like you, China was not on my map. So basically, I ended up in China, and this is I thought something that I was going to do for 2 years. It's now 11 years in. This is the platform, the culture, and the context where my learning journey really started to kick off in the sense of understanding globalization in education.
Good. That's an interesting journey. Could you focus a little on your leadership journey in China, specifically from your study of the Cambridge International Educational Leadership Program and your master's in educational leadership? Then I will talk about myself.
So my journey started off as an opportunity in a school in Guangzhou where I was offered a middle managing management post, which is head of humanities. At that point in time, I've always wanted to do my PhD. So on trying to apply into many universities, I was declined basically because my PhD I wanted my PhD to be in education leadership. So most of the universities were offering me a DBA, a doctorate in business administration, because my last qualification was an MBA, which is equally understandable. So I kind of, under your direction, I backtracked. I wouldn't say backtracked, just decided to do a master's in educational leadership. That was through UNICAF. They offered me an 80% scholarship because I think LEDCs, or less developed countries, were given the opportunity to study. So this way I started my second master's in educational leadership, my second master's, which is in educational leadership, because I realized at that point in time I want to remain in education, even though I have a very entrepreneurial background. I wanted to remain in education, and I wanted to do my PhD in education. So I think you and my last school gave me the direction of moving into the educational field further.
Thank you for recognizing my contribution to your educational journey. I'm sure you wanted to ask me about myself. So let me get into talking about myself. I consider myself as an educator, researcher, uh, an intercultural linguistic communicator. So that's how I consider myself. I also consider myself as a global citizen in the sense that I owe a moral responsibility to the globe at large because of my experience through Ghana, Namibia, Lesotho, and China. I recognize that in spite of the surface differences, and I call them surface differences of color, race, gender, the common thing underpins our behavior is our common humanity, and therefore we should affect each other through whatever we do. And so, as a global citizen, I think that my aim is to affect the world through my educational encounters with people globally. So I consider myself a global citizen. Recently, I've also delved into looking at decolonial pedagogies, and we shall talk about that later. Yes, part of my research. That's what I'm doing currently, and so we shall talk about that later on. I have a number of academic qualifications that I would not want to bother people with, but in the subsequent or in the episodes that are going to follow, I'm sure they may come up. So, for the last 3 decades, as I've indicated, I've worked across Ghana, Namibia, Lesotho, and China. And each of my experiences has shaped my understanding of education, human relations, and the empathy that the world needs to make all of us happy in this little world that we live in. And so currently, I consider myself as a teacher, a curriculum leader, researcher, and a global educational consultant. So that's basically who I am. Currently, I consider myself as a teacher, a curriculum leader, researcher, and a global educational consultant. So that's basically who I am. Yes. Now, Abiga, let's move quickly into your philosophy of education as an educator, teaching, learning, and leadership.
I would say my philosophy starts from people first. I think this stems from our cultural and contextual upbringing, growing up in South Africa. And as I said, from a humanitarian perspective, my geography teacher and our South African political structures, post apartheid and pre apartheid. So, people first is very important for me, students and teachers and communities at large. This we take to the classroom. Also, there's also my studies, which you drew out for me earlier on, my MBA and my master's in education leadership, has helped me to think strategically and systematically. This helped me to build frameworks for my leadership, on how to handle people, personality. And I think just being a humanitarian itself and engaging in curiosity in culture, being interdependent, interrelated, a subject that acknowledge global interdependence, thinking critically. I think also human dignity is very important. So today, I would say my philosophy is lead with vision, serve with humility, and learning never stops. This learning is dynamic. My studies through the Cambridge Educational Leadership Program reinforced me that great leaders don't just manage change; they become the change. And I think I also resonate very well with that in the sense that it was said by Mahatma Gandhi that be the change you wish to see. So my philosophy is just that.
Yes, I think I became an educational leader after training with Cambridge in 2020. I think it was a period of at the initial stages of COVID, and I had a rigorous training. Is it a 16-week training with Cambridge? It was online to become accredited, the program leader for educational leadership of the program. I studied basic educational concepts and theories, and then the training also focused on contextual factors in educational leadership. One of the things that I insist in my training that training in one school or being an educational leader in one school could be distinctively different from another school because of the contextual factors. We shall talk about these things later. And then I trained, I think, six of you. Eventually, three of you completed, and we had two distinctions. You were one, and there was a pass. Subsequently, I had that training. But my what that program taught me was that leadership is not just about titles. It is about the role that you play and the effect that you have on those who follow you. I believe in transformational leadership and I also believe in instructional leadership, which are the two key leadership concepts in education. And I'm sure we'll have a conversation about that also later. But in the classroom, I was teaching pre university courses. So I taught A level literature to Chinese students. And imagine teaching Chinese students who learn English as a foreign language and teaching them all the concepts of Western literature. It is one of the most revealing experiences and most quote unquote ravishing experiences that I've had as a teacher because I got the opportunity to not only teach them, but also to learn from them. And there were moments what I'll call the intercultural moments when you discover that although you think you have some knowledge beyond the students, you discover that the students also have knowledge that you never expected them to have. And engagement that you had with them also brought out different understanding of the world, different thinking that students bring to the classroom, and different approaches to learning. But I'm also happy that after teaching them for 2 years, some students got A in literature. Chinese students, people will say they are not first language users of English. And then I also got to understand that teaching English is not also the same thing as speaking English. Teaching English is difficult. It's different from speaking English. And so that experience will live with me for the rest of my life. I do not have permission to mention some names. I would have done so if they would have. I had their permission to do so, but I had, yes. So yes. So that has been my experience. Currently, I think that my focus has shifted a little from Western centered educational theories to decolonized theories. I'm trying to look at it from what we call border thinking, not rejecting Western theories, but recognizing that the Western theories still persist but how we can also include marginalized theories into educational systems globally. So basically, that's what I've been looking at the moment.
I agree with you. Context is very important because dealing with multicultural educators or teachers, they bring in their context with them and try to you cannot understand the context that they are in. So I think the alignment between the teachers and the context of whichever country they are in needs to they need to see that they need to align, maybe understand that this is the context and this is the way I need to operate under this context and to make it work for both the student and the teacher.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Context is very important. And especially when you are teaching different curriculums. I don't know whether you can say curriculums or curricula. For example, teaching IB, the International Baccalaureate, could be distinctively different from teaching Cambridge, although both of them are international in orientation. Cambridge is focused on content knowledge, typically from a Western perspective. Very structured, yes, that's the term. Very structured and sometimes quote unquote rigid. And one should be careful when one goes outside what Cambridge expects, especially in terms of assessment. But IB, which is more global, is flexible. It is also focused on inquiry-based learning and an opportunity to bring, yes, opportunity to bring different cultural perspectives into the classroom. So, as I indicated earlier, whether in the classroom as an instructional leader or outside the classroom as a transformational leader, context matters. Context in terms of pedagogy, in terms of subject content, in terms of the philosophy behind what you are teaching. You should always be aware that context is important. And the other context is the context of the students, their background, where they have come from, and how where they have come from impacts on what they are learning. And the larger educational environment of teachers. For example, in Namibia, it was a multicultural, multilinguistic environment, complete one in terms of students, faculty, and perspectives to life. But in China, for example, it was largely monocultural in terms of students' population, but multicultural in terms of teacher population. How to navigate the system becomes sometimes very complex. But if you understand contextual factors in educational leadership, educational delivery of content, it becomes less difficult to navigate these challenges. So, this is my experience as an international educator. Okay, before we wrap up this interesting conversation, we've done some talking. Let me ask you this one, and it's related to your role as a middle level manager and your studies in the Certificate of Educational Leadership. We will talk about that extensively in our next episode. But just give us a taste of what you experience in educational leadership program, the certificate. Just give me a taste.
Okay, so you as our program leader, I think we clashed horns on multiple things. And I think many people that know me, sometimes I can be resistant to certain things. And I think we both are strong headed in our thinking on certain aspects. And that's where I learned. And I think when I brought in personality into my leadership writing, some people didn't agree with me that personality is a big part of being a leader. So that's where my learning began. We started off, as you said, I think with six candidates. It took extensive reading, and I think across that journey, I came over some really good books that wasn't basically old leadership theories. I think we speak about the great man theory, transformational leadership, distributed leadership, contingency. So there's quite a few leadership styles we will speak about later. I think the important part about that journey for me was identifying my leadership style, which was part of the course, identifying my job description. I think most people don't understand what's their job description. You just get a role, and you think, or you in your perception, in your mind, you think this is what I'm supposed to do. I would say that this course, the Cambridge International Education Leadership course, kind of streamlined where we're supposed to be as middle managers, in the sense that this is my job description. This is what I need to do for my department. This is what PD should look like. This is what data should look like. This is how I need to handle certain situations in a certain context. So that learning really developed me. My reading and my knowledge of internationalism expanded, and I think my writing improved according to you. I think you always say my South African English is not English. So yeah, we had a lot of jokes on some of the words that we use back home. So it was really a good learning experience. It was really a good academic experience. And it was so good to see the other candidates look at leadership from a different angle. So, and I think this has led us to believe that a team of different personalities and a team of different leadership styles will determine the success of an organization or an institute. That for me was a very big understanding. Beside in education itself, even in business, you need a team of people that will understand each other. We may not, we may agree to disagree, but I think the crux of the matter is understanding what is the purpose of our journey within the institute. For me, that was a very important one.
And you took a very unconventional stance, I'm not sure you remember, on laissez faire theory of education. And I think that when you had your final presentation, the head of the institution wondered why you thought that leadership and laissez faire was also critical in the educational context. Just tell me briefly about that story.
Okay, I think a lot of people may not, as in, I think it was our really good principal, Mr. Tony Hickling, if I could mention his name, amazing human being. He kind of questioned me a lot before I submitted my final presentation to Cambridge. He asked, why did I choose that? It's not because I'm lazy. I believe that not everybody needs to be managed. Not everybody needs to be controlled. There are certain individuals that would come in. They know what they're doing. They understand the process, they understand the procedure, they understand the policy. There is no need for me as a manager to be breathing down that person's neck who I know has the ability to complete their tasks, meet their deadlines, and understands policy of the school, procedure of the school, coming on time, coming to school functions. So this person really doesn't need me 80% of the time monitoring them or watching what they do. I would prefer kind of 80-20. If I understand that if he or she is capable, I would leave them to manage themselves until I see the need to intervene. Obviously, I would intervene when needed. So for me, the laissez-faire, I think it's very important because some people can manage on their own. They don't need people to be hovering around them. I would rather spend my time on somebody who needs some coaching or mentoring, some young, newly ex, uh, experienced teacher, or somebody that has. Sorry, thank you. Newly employed teacher. Thank you for correcting me. Somebody who's been in an international platform for the first time would need more direction. So it was a challenge to convince him about my leadership style. I guess he was more by the book person, so he wondered why was Ambiga saying this kind of thing, would she even get any credits or for saying something like this in her my submission of my writing, my dissertation, what is it called? So anyways, I did pass for the distinction.
Yes, but I actually remember that Cambridge made a comment on that your presentation of the that leadership style, laissez-faire leadership style, was excellent. Actually, the way you put it in your final portfolio, as we call it, and so it's something that stands out in our leadership engagement or in leadership course that we did at for with Cambridge International. And because we've spoken for a while now, is there anything that you want to say before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say thank you to both of us. I would like to also share with the listeners. I think I mentioned a little bit in the beginning that our idea of starting the podcast and starting this journey is about sharing our experience. We believe, I firmly believe that I want to go back home. Home is South Africa, and education builds a nation. It is the lifeblood of a nation. We, as fellow Africans, I feel have a duty, an obligation to eventually go back home and share our learning and develop our continent and other continents as well, or countries that are LEDCs that require some direction, some visions, some goals in line with promoting or enhancing the nation. So when education blossoms, a nation will rise. So for me, this is a personal journey about not only about myself, but being from the African continent and also being Asian as well, as we hail from, my forefathers hail from India. As you know, the history of South Africa, colonialism, apartheid, and indentured laborers. So for me, this is something that I'm passionate about. So this was part of our journey to share our learning, and I think we will learn a lot along the way from others as well who have experienced internationalism, and who would have to share not only from Africa or from South Africa or from Ghana, people from Colombia, Brazil, that have people from Malawi, Nigeria, that have been international in Thailand, South Korea, Japan, China, in the Middle East. They would touch base with us and share their international experience and obviously grow and develop their country and their people as well. Because, as I said, and I'll say it again, education is the lifeblood of a nation. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you very much, Bega. This has been Educast Africa Asia, or Asia Africa. We shall have another episode. Thank you for watching us and listening to us. My name is Henry, and you are Ambega.